Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Proseminar. This is HSED 701. For this class, this is really a new class that I have designed to help prepare y'all for transitioning into doctoral level coursework. I will post this video, which will have all of the course content in it, and there are 3 assignments that you'll complete. The first is an academic writing review. The second is some beginning, maybe middle thinking for some of you on your dissertation topic. And the last is a one-on-one meeting. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those in turn. For the academic writing review assignment, this is an assignment wherein I would like you to pull together the feedback that you've gotten from writing over the course of your time in the program. And looking at that feedback in aggregate, answer some questions that I've laid out both here and in the Canvas assignment. And really what I would like you to do is think about the ways in which you are potentially looking to grow as an academic writer over the next year, preparing yourself for the dissertation work. And so identifying both positive and constructive themes in the feedback that you've received across courses, and looking to see if there are perhaps distinctions in that feedback according to the type of course it is. So whether it was a therapy or education methods course, perhaps, like one of the sex therapy or sex ed curriculum courses, versus maybe some of the more kinds of foundations courses like 592 or 594. So thinking about how that feedback might be different across those different types of writing. And then thinking about how the feedback that you've received has changed over the course of your time here at Widener, if at all. And so based on that feedback and thinking about all of those questions, think about what are the ways in which you'll anticipate needing some growth or some additional work on your academic writing as you prepare for doctoral level coursework and for dissertation. The second assignment is a bit longer, and this is where I'd like you to begin thinking about your dissertation topic. So I have all of the questions listed on Canvas. These are sort of the main prompts or the pieces of the assignment. And really here I'm looking for you to lay out a couple of paragraphs that give me a sense of your dissertation topic idea or perhaps ideas. And so give a little bit of a sense of the background of that literature, what your idea is and how that fits within the existing literature. You'll make sure you use APA formatted references in that section as appropriate. And then with that information in mind, I would like you to write several sets of paragraphs to think about answering each of the questions that I've laid out in each of these sections. So thinking about variety of things using some of the readings that we have, but thinking about your place as a scholar, the road ahead in terms of your scholarship and in terms of your particular topic. And then I want you to end the whole thing with a reference list of at least 25 references that are relevant to your dissertation topic. And anything that you cite within the answers to any of those questions or within those first couple of paragraphs that you write will absolutely be in your reference list, but you'll have a variety of references in there that will not be in the text of your writing. So that's fine. I just wanted to note that distinction there. And then finally, towards the end of the semester, I'll initiate and start scheduling with you all to have some one-on-one meetings with each of you. And those are really a place for me to review the work that you've presented in the course thus far, to chat with you about your dissertation topic and ideas. And this is also a space for you to ask questions and get a better sense of how you can move forward in the best way. So one of the main things that I think is really important to communicate to students who are on this cusp of moving from the MET level coursework into the doctoral level coursework is thinking about the logistics of that process, what that looks like, as well as some of the expectations and how those change over the course of that transition. So one of the things that I want to address sort of first before I get into anything is what are the reasons people might be pursuing a PhD, and what are the reasons you might not decide to pursue a PhD? So there are obviously a lot of reasons people pursue a PhD. One of the primary ones is to focus on research. PhDs tend to be research training programs, and so that if that is a goal of yours, this is a good place for that. Another reason people might go into a PhD program and pursue a PhD is to get a faculty position, to get an academic position. And I just want to say a little note about that, particularly for our program. So overall, faculty positions are very challenging to get. I applied for many, many positions before getting the ones that I have gotten over my time. And I think this program in particular is can be a challenging one for folks to think about getting an academic position. I think that might change a bit over the course of time, but because you'll often be applying to jobs in more sort of traditional or mainstream types of departments like psychology or sociology, women and gender studies, things like that, those programs tend to look for people who are trained specifically in those disciplines. Because we are less traditional of a discipline and of a field, I think folks without any other background or training might struggle to get academic positions. And that doesn't mean it's impossible by any means. There are certainly folks within our faculty who have gotten their PhDs here. This is obviously an ideal fit for those folks. So just to note that may be a difficult goal. Another reason people get a PhD is for credibility via credentials. And this can be particularly important for folks who might be underrepresented in their discipline or in the academy or field, or for folks who are traditionally marginalized. So students or people of color, women, queer, LGBTQ folks. So getting a PhD may be a way towards legitimacy or credibility in a particular field. There are also a lot of reasons that I don't want to say are bad reasons to get a PhD, but maybe you're not quite suited for this pursuit. I think one of the potential issues folks run into, especially if you're not looking for a career in academia, is the danger of overqualification. There are many jobs that seek out somebody with a master's degree, and some jobs may be delighted to get somebody who has more qualification than that. Others may be concerned that they'll have to pay those folks more than they would pay somebody who has a master's and not a PhD, or that those folks will get bored in those positions or not actually want to work in that role. It's a lot of money, especially in a program like this where we don't fund students and you're all funding this yourself, funding it via student loans. It's a lot of money to sink into this. So for anyone who's thinking about this, I tell them to think about that balance. What are you paying out? What might you be looking at in terms of student loans? And does that pay off for you in terms of your salary at the end of the program? Another reason people might not is because they're just not interested in this. They're perhaps not interested in research at all, which as much of a research nerd as I am, I understand. So that may be a reason to bow out or to not pursue a PhD in the first place. And again, balancing all of those costs and benefits. This is a lot of time and a lot of energy you're about to invest in this, and really think about what that gets you at the end of the day, and if those costs are worth those benefits to you. Finally, I think the worst reason to get a PhD or to pursue a PhD is to get people to call you doctor. I'll have to say, until I came to Widener, where we ask folks to use the honorifics, I don't think anybody really ever called me doctor. So that is definitely not a benefit that you may be getting here. I put this small comic up here. You can pause and take a look at this, but the take-home message is that this is not really about glamour and glitz and all of that. And so another thing that I want to say, because it's a reality that we are dealing with in the world, is that not everybody who pursues a PhD actually finishes a PhD. So what we know from the literature more broadly is about 40 to 50% of doctoral students actually finish their PhD. The median time to completion is 7.5 years. That varies quite a bit by university, by discipline, for lots of reasons. And we do know, much like in the world more generally, that there are some pretty consistent disparities in completion rates. So one of the things we know about the social sciences, which I would count us as a part of, is that African American and Asian students are slightly less likely to complete their PhDs than our white students. And within the social sciences, we do know that completion is actually slightly higher for women than for men in the social sciences. These fields tend to be fairly dominated by women. So we do see a little bit of a disparity there. But I also want to say that attrition isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are some folks for whom this is not a good fit for a variety of reasons. So perhaps academically, it's not a good fit. Perhaps in terms of people's interests, it's not a good fit. In terms of everything else that's happening in their lives, it's not a good fit. And so there are lots of reasons that I think are or can be less negative reasons why people might exit out of a PhD. What we do know also from the literature is that those who do finish tend to be more intrinsically motivated than extrinsically motivated. They tend to have high quality coursework, have positive and effective supervision relationships, tend to have financial support, and develop professional identities and professional and academic networks, and also really perceive themselves to be competent. That perception of competence actually comes out in the literature as a pretty significant factor that predicts completion. And so as we transition into this kind of high stakes, high intensity end of your training, you're about to move into the doctoral level coursework next year, so 714, 850, 851, 831, and 832. And those academic standards will shift quite a bit in this time. So the workload will increase substantially. The expectations for performance will also increase pretty substantially. And less in sort of the academic performance realm, the expectations for enthusiasm, independence of work, engagement in the work, and some content expertise will also shift. So really taking much more ownership of and engagement in your educational path at this point. And so because that workload tends to shift quite a bit, we do expect much more engagement and prioritization of academic work. And that does create some work-life balance challenges. I wish I had some really excellent advice for you on how to manage that balance. Perhaps you can look at me and do as I say and not as I do, because I still haven't really mastered that balance yet. But it's something that you want to look out for and perhaps make your network aware of, that you will be perhaps checking out, not attending events nearly as often as you were before, things like that. And at the end of the day, the purpose of getting a PhD, the purpose of this doctoral training is to prepare you to be an independent researcher and scholar. So at this point, the coursework and the expectations will really shift to move you in that direction, with the dissertation really being this moment of transition from student to scholar. And so in terms of the logistics of this transition, you'll all start this doctoral coursework next year, and you'll need to complete all doctoral coursework with a grade of B or better. That's non-negotiable for these courses. 850 and 831 must be taken concurrently, and 851 and 832 must be taken concurrently. So 850 and 831 are in the fall, 832 and 851 are in the spring. And then once you complete those with a grade of B or better, you'll register for 901, which is the first of the dissertation courses. Prior to that process, you'll also complete an online form where you will indicate your preferences for dissertation chairs. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So I'll dive a little bit more deeply into dissertation, because I feel like folks are really starting to think about this, and perhaps your anxiety is ramping up a little bit at this point. So the dissertation is part of the required coursework for the PhD, And again, it's really meant to have you demonstrate your capacity to independently design and execute research. And I underline independently here because this is really a place where you're driving this train. This is your dissertation, this is your project. That doesn't mean that we won't help you on this. Obviously, we read drafts, we give our recommendations and our thoughts in terms of methods, in terms of structure, in terms of your research question. So this doesn't mean floating off in space alone without any assistance, but this really means that you are driving this train and we are helping you. Again, this marks the transition from being a student to being a scholar. And something that I say over and over and over to students is the dissertation is not your magnum opus. This is not intended to be your masterpiece, end-all be-all sort of project. This is an exercise to demonstrate that you can ask an informed research question and answer that question, that you can be in conversation with the scholarly literature as an independent scholar. The dissertation itself consists of 5 chapters: the introduction, the literature review, the methods, the results, and the discussion. So very much formatted like an academic article and presentation. And so one of your first tasks is going to be selecting a topic and developing research questions. And one of the assignments that we have in this class, and thinking about your dissertation, asks you to think about what that topic might be and how that topic connects to your professional and personal goals. You want your dissertation to help you develop expertise in an area in which that expertise will be useful to you as a professional. So even if you don't plan to ever do research again, think about what area that you'd like to become an expert in and how your dissertation can help you get there and can demonstrate to other people your expertise. The next step will be writing that literature review and then conducting the research and analyses and writing all of that up. And again, this dissertation is your baby. Your chair and your committee members can help you raise that baby, but you're ultimately the responsible party for that baby. And to think about CHSS dissertations, not surprisingly, the research should be related to gender and/or sexuality in some way. I've given you a little bit of a list here of some recent topics that students have worked on, just to give you a sense of sort of how loosely or closely connected to sexuality these topics are. These aren't the exact titles, but these will give you a sense of these topics. And so these topics can range from examining the role of romantic relationships in early substance abuse recovery, thinking about how social workers or other professionals handle these issues in their own practice, looking at sexual satisfaction and body image and self-perceived sexual desirability among different groups of people. And you can look in the Widener library and download any of them if you would like. I've uploaded a few examples to the Canvas group here, so you'll be able to see I put 1 proposal and 2 full dissertations in there for you to look at. But you can always download any of those dissertations. We publish those via ProQuest, so you can access those through our library here. One of the unique things about doing a dissertation in CHSS is that you really have to do some education around your content area. In other PhD programs, students are accepted in their first year to begin working with a specific mentor. They already are interested in the same type of research that that mentor is interested in, and they typically work in their lab for several years doing that same kind of research with that mentor over the course of time. So by the time they get to their dissertation, they know that their mentor knows that literature inside and out, just like they hopefully do at that point. We're a little different in that we match students with their dissertation chairs at the beginning of the dissertation phase. So it may be that you've never worked with or perhaps never even interacted with the faculty member who will be your chair. It may be that you've been working with them the whole time and talking about this idea with them for years. But in many cases, we're often expecting you to be the content area expert and to be able to educate us on that content area so that we can better help you. For example, I have a student, the impact of colorism paper is one of my students, and prior to her starting that work, I didn't know a whole lot about colorism other than the definition of that. And so she really had to be the one who took the responsibility for educating me and giving me a sense of how colorism fit with self-perceived sexual desirability, why she thought that those two things should be examined in association with one another. I've also put the dissertation manual in Canvas files and a couple of proposals. So all of that should help you get a sense of some of the logistics and some of the expectations. Another thing that I'll note is I think sometimes students can look at an example of a dissertation and say, all right, each of those subheadings are the subheadings that I have to have. That's exactly how I have to lay mine out. And I would just say, other than the 5-chapter model, you can really think about creating the text and the headings within those sections in your own ways. So don't feel like you have to have the exact setup of each of those as you look at them. And so to get into logistics a little bit more, once you complete all of your coursework with a grade of B or better, you can register for 901. 901 is taught by one of our full-time faculty members, typically Dr. Crane. You'll complete this dissertation chair selection form, and in that you'll rank your top 5 preferences for dissertation chair and give a little bit of a reason why you ranked those people in the order that you did. And then essentially what I will do is, or whoever the PhD program director is at whatever point you get there, what that person will do is go to the faculty, ask each faculty member how many dissertation students they are taking on that semester, and then look at the rankings from each of those and try and match those together to the best of our ability. And so as you think about selecting a dissertation chair, think about that content area. So does that person have overlap even in one of the areas that you're interested in, perhaps? Do you have experience with that person that demonstrates to you that your working styles will be compatible, that you enjoy working with that person, that you find them helpful? That is a big component of that relationship as well. You'll be spending a lot of time with this person and having some really intense conversations about their constructive feedback, and so that should be a person whose feedback you can work with and who is helpful to you in that writing process. And then in that 901 class, that's actually a week-to-week class that meets on Wednesday evenings online on Zoom. So during that class, you'll develop ideally a rough draft of chapters 1 through 3, which constitute your proposal. So you'll ideally complete a draft of the proposal, and you'll meet with your chair during that process a couple of times, even though Dr. Crane will be the one teaching the class. You'll start to get your chair, your mentor involved in the process. I encourage you to be really proactive in that process and sort of get as much out of the chair at that moment as you can, so that they can really inform the development of that rough draft. And I think it's also really good during those initial meetings with your chairs to ask them some really solid or concrete questions about how they typically work, what their expectations are, what their modes of communication typically are, what they expect in terms of length or breadth or things like that. So really getting a sense of those expectations as you go in. Once you pass 901, you'll register for 902. And that's when you really work one-on-one with your dissertation chair to refine and possibly, ideally, defend your proposal. I will say that not a whole lot of people defend their proposal in that second semester. And so often people will go on to 903, which is the next course. But in 902, 903, you and your chair will work together on your proposal. You'll also work together to select 2 other committee members. I make the same recommendations in terms of selecting committee members. So if there's an area of expertise, perhaps that your chair doesn't have and would be useful to you, trying to fill out that team. I often try and say, like, create your academic dream team there and think about whose ideas and whose perspectives you would like to have inform your work. You and your chair will work together to decide when your proposal is ready for review by your committee members. You or your chair will send it to your committee members, and they can either say at that point that it's ready for proposal defense or that it needs additional work before they're ready to schedule a proposal defense. Once both of those committee members give their okay that it's ready to go to proposal defense, you'll work with all three of those folks to schedule a time for that proposal defense. In that proposal defense, you'll do a 15-minute presentation, typically of your research, and then each of the committee members and your chair will ask you a variety of questions about that research, ask you to talk about the literature, perhaps how you made decisions, what other options you considered in that process. This is really a chance for you to both demonstrate your own expertise and your thinking around this project, as well as get their insight on that work and what might improve it or strengthen it. Once you defend your proposal, either with or without some revision in that process, you'll advance to candidacy. So it's only once you've defended your proposal that you are a PhD candidate. Upon defending your proposal, you'll register for 910, and during that time or just before that, you'll submit your IRP application. And then once you have IRP approval, you'll be ready to begin data collection. During that time, you'll register for 910 and for 920 for the data collection and initial writing portion of the full dissertation. So you'll be working with your chair in that same process where you'll be writing chapters 4, the results, and chapter 5, the discussion section. Once your chair thinks that is ready, you'll send it out to the committee members, and they'll go through that same process of telling you if it's ready for defense or needs additional work. Once they both give the okay that it is ready for defense, you'll schedule that defense with at least 2 weeks of a window to give all of the staff time to prepare all of the materials and invite the community to attend. And the dissertation defense looks a lot like the proposal defense does. You'll give roughly a 15-minute presentation on your research and on your findings. And then the committee members and the chair will ask you questions, discuss those findings, often ask you what you're thinking about in terms of publication and next steps. The final dissertation steps in terms of graduating and moving forward to commencement. Once you successfully defend your proposal, you'll work with folks in the library to complete the dissertation publishing process. All dissertations must be bound and also published online via ProQuest. There's lots of fees and whatnot involved in that. Also, at some point during this stage, you'll petition for graduation. So you'll do that petitioning process. You'll do the library process. Right now it's with Molly Wolf, who is our liaison for the library. And there are a variety of deadlines that you have to consider in that process. So I've included those here. Just to give you a sense of how quickly those tend to come up. So, for example, if you anticipate graduating in May, you need to defend your dissertation by April 1st. So that's quite a bit before that sort of mid-May deadline and early to mid-May commencement process. So just a heads up that those deadlines are very firm, particularly those around petitioning for graduation and around publishing in the library. Molly has asked that we don't even submit final grades until she's been through the publication process with you. So those deadlines are pretty firm. In terms of thinking about this whole process, again, I really recommend reading some examples of dissertations, particularly if there are topics that you're interested in. If you want to look at different dissertations for folks who worked with different chairs to get a sense of how those expectations and how those might be different according to those different chairs. We also have been inviting the full community to attend dissertation defenses via Zoom. So look out in your Widener email for those invitations and feel free to join one of those. You get a little bit of a sense of what that looks like. In terms of registration, again, back to sort of the logistics of this, you're required to take a minimum of 18 dissertation credits. Most people are at that or beyond that. You'll do 901, 902, and then if necessary, 903. You can register for 903 up to 2 times. Beyond that, you'll need the program director's position approval to register for that. 910 and 920 are intended to be the dissertation research phase of all of this, where you're actually collecting and analyzing data. Those two courses are the only two in this sequence that are 6-credit courses. And then finally, 930 functions in a similar way as 903. So if you are not complete with data collection or with data analysis by the time you finish 920, you can register for 930 up to 2 times to complete that process. So there are also a couple of financial aid adjustments. So if you are in 901, 902, 903, those are 3-credit courses. And so there are these additional sort of markers that we can register folks for. These stand for off-campus. So it's OC 000A and OC 000B. And those bring you up or sort of adjust you up to whatever status you need for your financial aid situation. Again, the dissertation manual is posted in our Canvas group, so hopefully that will be useful to you. That's a fairly new document, so if you have feedback on that, if you have additional questions on that, please send them my way. I would love to hear those. And then finally, this is sort of my collected and unsolicited advice for dissertation success. So I think really developing good relationships with faculty members early on is really helpful to you. Talking with them about your research ideas, even informally, can help you refine those ideas and get more and more narrow as you start working towards that in the world. I really strongly encourage you not to wait until 901 to become familiar with the literature in your area. In 901, the initial assignment in the very first week is to write a full summary of your research. So if you haven't even begun reading articles, you're going to fall behind really quickly in 901. So folks will often ask me if they should start 901 in the summer versus in the fall. And I always recommend the fall, and for students to spend a really targeted amount of time in the summer to get all the literature in their heads before they jump into that process. Again, don't try to make this dissertation your life's work. This is an exercise, but do decide what kind of expertise you need or want in your life. As you embark upon this, remember that though you are driving this train, you're also collaborating with a team of scholars who will all have very specific ideas about that research or about what they expect from dissertation research more broadly. Though they are expensive, I can't say enough how important I think it is to attend conferences. I think this is a great way to network with other scholars in your area, to get a sense of what academic presentations look like, to get a sense of the scope of research and the kind of research that people are doing. A lot of the research that you'll see presented at conferences is research that's not yet published. So that will give you a little bit of a sense of what kinds of, what scholar is working on what area. That might give you a great connection for somebody who could be a committee member or for somebody who could potentially be helpful to you as you think about embarking on the dissertation research. As much as we've tried to keep people moving smoothly, there will always be setbacks, so anticipate those. There could be issues getting your IRB application approved, perhaps more revisions than you'd anticipated or planned at any stage of the process. You may encounter disagreements between your committee members about the best way forward, and so that can always be a little challenging to manage that. You may have difficulty in recruitment or data collection in some way. So there are lots of ways in which the ideal timeline doesn't necessarily always work out. So be reasonable in that process. It can be really frustrating. So try and take that in stride as much as humanly possible. And be proactive. So again, this is your baby. You are the one who is responsible for this ultimately. And so reaching out and getting the help that you need is really important. So if you're having trouble at any point, reach out to the PhD program director. And for right now, that's me. Don't think I'll do it forever and ever, but for right now, that's me. And please reach out to me if you are struggling with anything. And finally, I think this is true in lots of realms, but comparison is the thief of joy. I think a lot of dissertation students in particular will look around them and say, oh my God, that person's working faster, they got theirs done already, what's wrong with me, etc. Know that this process is your own. And everybody is working at their own pace in this. Everybody has different jobs and other life demands and expectations. And so really keep that in mind as you're sort of looking sideways and above and below to see what other folks are doing. This is another one that I'll give you a little bit of time to think about. So I put this here just to acknowledge that this is a bit of a roller coaster. So I'll let you pause and spend a little time looking at this one. But this is really just meant to indicate that I know this work is hard. I know it can be a slog, and it'll probably feel more like that starting next year and into your dissertation work years. So finding that balance is really important. So dissertation funding, as you all know, and as is really unfortunate for all of us, we don't have funding for our students here. There is quite a bit of funding out in the world for dissertation students. Some of that will fund the student themselves. Some of it will fund the research. So here are just a few examples. QuadS, the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality, gives out a couple of dissertation awards a year. The American Association for University Women, Center for Engaged Scholarship, National Academy of Education, Woodrow Wilson Foundation. There's lots of them out there. A lot of you have probably heard of National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health dissertation funding. Those tend to be much more competitive than some of the other forms of funding, but those are also out there. And just as a heads up to anybody who might pursue those options, you have to include your chair and engage your chair, and also some university officials who will be responsible for the ultimate submission of any funding applications that happen. So be sure to come to me or to Dr. Citron or somebody to get that process started if that's something you're interested in then. That can be a lot of time waiting for that to get reviewed and hopefully approved and for that money to come through. And you'll really want to think about tailoring your application to the goals of the funding institute and the funding line itself. So for example, if you're applying to a dissertation funding scholarship that is geared towards research on LGBTQ folks, you want to make sure that you're really beefing up that part of your proposal and giving them a sense of how this work will ultimately improve the lives of LGBTQ folks in the world. You'll also want to be really explicit and specific about the work that you're doing and be reasonable about the money that you request. And it should go without saying, but follow all of the instructions. So certainly that is not much of a how-to in terms of how to get dissertation funding, but if that's something that you are interested in and ultimately want to do as you get closer to that mark, please let me know and we can certainly start to help you with that process. So the last thing that I'll talk about is academic writing. And academic writing will make or break you. And I'll have to say for many of the students that we encounter who struggle through the dissertation process, I would say this is probably the #1 reason people are struggling and not able to move forward in the dissertation process. Often I see situations where they revise something, turn it back into their chair looks at it and says, this still isn't ready. This is not at the level of academic writing that it should be. Maybe I don't know what you're saying. Maybe I can't really get through it. Maybe there are so many APA formatting errors that I can't get through it. So both in your next set of doc coursework in the 850 and 831 sequences, and definitely in dissertation stage, your academic writing skills will make or break you. I can't say that enough or say that more clearly or firmly. So my main advice is to write early and often. We also have the Writing Center folks. I've had mixed success with them, but there are some students who have worked with them on their dissertation and taken that dissertation to them piece by piece and gotten some help in that writing process. There are other folks who've used dissertation coaches, folks like that who can help you sort of move that process forward and think about your academic writing. I would say also, most of the reason that I see people not pass 850 and 831 is also because of their academic writing. So often you may not even get to the dissertation stage if academic writing is an issue for you. Some academic writing tips. Probably most of you at this point have heard me say many of these things, but avoiding passive voice, being really concise and really specific in your language, aiming for conceptual clarity and consistency. So if you're talking about a particular concept like sexual satisfaction, make sure that the measure that you have is actually addressing sexual satisfaction, that you're not changing up that language as you go through the dissertation or go through the whatever document it is that you're writing. And APA formatting, we cannot stress enough, and certainly on these assignments that you're turning in for this class, I'll be looking at your APA formatting and giving you some feedback on that. One of the things that I really stress that folks do is use Microsoft Word functions to your advantage. So if you go into preferences and spelling and grammar, you can see this little button down here for settings. And within that, you can ask Word to mark when you're using passive voice, mark when you're being excessively wordy. Note that you want the punctuation inside of the quotes, quotation marks, which is APA format, that you have 1 space or 2 spaces. APA format is 2 spaces. So there are all sorts of additional options in here that you can check and use to help you move forward with your academic writing and just be sort of an additional editor for you as you move forward in that. One of the primary tasks that you'll do in this academic writing world is organize, digest, and synthesize academic literature. So I think often students jump into this process and say, all right, here's the first article I found on this topic. I'm going to sit down and read it front to end, and next article, front to end, next article. And what I recommend is a process of pre-reading and categorizing. So this may look like pulling together a whole bunch of articles and just skimming the abstract, skimming maybe the results or the discussion or whatever piece of it is potentially interesting for you, and then categorizing it. So you may categorize it based on the topic, based on the methodological area, based on the year in which it was published. There may be a variety of categorization systems you want to use. And then once you do that, you can narrow in on what it is that you need to read and what you need to read deep and what you can read shallow. There are certain things, let's say, for example, you are doing a project on unintended or unplanned pregnancy. And maybe in your initial paragraph, you just want to give some sense of what those rates are in the United States. So how many people in the United States every year experience an unplanned or unintended pregnancy? What's the definition of that? And for some of those types of articles, you might not need to read so deeply. You're really pulling out the statistics there, the definitions there, really just demonstrating that there's an issue in the world. Whereas some of the other articles that get into perhaps factors that predict unplanned or unintended pregnancy, demographic differences, outcomes, whatever it is that you're interested in, being able to have those categories of that work and then decide which of the ones that you really need to focus on to demonstrate the need for your research question or for your research. So you'll often categorize and recategorize. For those of you who are not already using something like RefWorks or Zotero or EndNote, I really, really strongly recommend you start doing that at this point. Those will help you to organize all of your academic literature in one place. It will help you do some categorization of that. You can put tags on it. You can keep notes in there. It keeps all of the PDFs or the links to those articles within whatever software you use. Do note that typos in, typos out. So whatever you type in there for titles, journal titles, things like that, if you misspell that or if you pull it from a website where it's misspelled, that's what will show up in your paper and your writing. For many of you, you also had the first Proseminar course with me, so hopefully you've already set up some of those journal table of content alerts. or Google alerts perhaps for your particular topic, but I would strongly recommend doing that at this point so that you're not getting to this endpoint and trying to go to literature all at one time, but you're just constantly taking that in, noting when new articles are published, getting familiar with the authors in that area, getting familiar with the areas of research within that topic, and as much as that as you can do, but way before your dissertation, the more successful and more quickly you will get through that process. So read early and often. And as you're thinking about synthesizing, the literature review, I think, in the dissertation is a pretty unique chapter in that you're both trying to demonstrate the breadth of your knowledge, as well as demonstrate to your reader the need for the research that you're about to propose. So you may want to synthesize and organize the literature temporally, so looking at the trends over time. You may want to organize that according to methods or theoretical frameworks, according to the areas of the literature in terms of, perhaps these are factors that are associated with unintended or unplanned pregnancy. These are outcomes that are associated with pregnancy. Maybe there's outcomes for kids and outcomes for parents and things like that. So thinking about what are the categories, what are the content areas, and how do you want to lay that out for your reader in a way that both demonstrates your expertise and demonstrates the need for the research that you're about to propose. One of the things that I find folks often struggle with is how to deal with a lot of the inconsistencies in the literature. So in that realm of unintended pregnancy, to stay with that example, you may find some literature that says that kids who are the product of unintended pregnancies turn out just like kids who were from planned pregnancies, whereas you may find other articles that say, here's all the advantages or disadvantages of being a kid that came from an unplanned pregnancy or an unintended pregnancy. And that is going to be your job to some degree to both note those inconsistencies and try and think a little bit about why those might exist. So this is also a really interesting blend of the academic literature and you synthesizing that literature, as well as you inserting your own voice in there. Again, you're becoming a scholar, so it's your job to look at that literature and to synthesize it and to develop your own critiques of that literature and your own ideas that emerge from that literature. So note when there are gaps in the literature, if there are methodological strengths and weaknesses that you think should be noted as we evaluate those literatures and think about the way forward. And always as you're writing these lit reviews, you want to think about your linear narrative. So all of this writing, even though it can seem rather dry in some cases, all of it is storytelling. So even if you're writing a single standalone lit review, if you're writing a dissertation, all of it is linear and needs to tell some sort of a story. So as we think about all of this, I think it's really important to think early and to get feedback. And so that's one of the things that we'll do in this class is I'll get a sense of your research interests, some of your academic writing strengths and weaknesses, and then give you some feedback as we go so that you'll hopefully be in the best place possible to start next year as a doc student and to move forward successfully with your dissertation. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have concerns, ideas, what have you, post those in the class Q&A, and I'm happy to have whatever discussion is helpful to you. If you have questions about the assignment, please let me know, or any of the assignments, please let me know, and I look forward to meeting with you all one-on-one later in the semester.